15 Most Controversial Moments of Malcolm X's Life, Part 1. If you are brand new to our channel, we invite you to take a moment to subscribe. Just click on the lit red button as well as the gray bell. Why the bell? Well, it will let you know every time we post a new video. One. The Nation of Islam. At the time, this was incredibly controversial. Most of the Western world had no clue what Islam was, and most took it with a grain of salt. Like most things Malcolm did, this movement was perhaps the most misunderstood. Many who heard about the Nation of Islam, not to be confused with the religion of Islam, and heard Malcolm's name tied at the forefront, instantly developed their own thoughts and concerns with the religion. There was an estimated 400 people involved with the Nation of Islam when Malcolm was released from jail, after Malcolm started holding rallies, educating countless on the religious ideals he now represented, and the freedom it had brought him. Numbers of the Nation of Islam were reportedly at 45,000 members. This statistic alone should let you know what kind of character that Malcolm had, and his ability to lead a group of people towards a common goal. Two. Detroit Red. Upon his arrival to the street of Harlem, New York, he developed quite the nickname for himself. He would tell people that he was from Michigan, and while most people hadn't heard of Lansing, Michigan, he would announce he was from Detroit, and it stuck rather well. Known for his diverse tactics in the streets, and his violence, the nickname Detroit Red just seemed to fit, and with commanding knowledge of street smarts he demanded respect. He would conquer the criminal underworld of Harlem. However, he would find himself caught up in a string of burglaries that would end up in a 10-year prison sentence for the infamous Detroit Red. During this time, Malcolm X was quoted as saying, "During this time I was only afraid of three things: jail, a job, and the army." This persona of Malcolm X would end along with the rest of Malcolm, as he was reborn inside the prison walls. Three. Formed the Organization of Afro-American Unity, OAAU. Following his departure from the Nation of Islam, this organization, founded by Malcolm X and John Henrik Clarke, was a worldly organization that would help unify 22 million African Americans. Malcolm insisted that no monetary donations would be accepted by any organizations, and that the success of the Afro-Americans in the Western world was directly correlated to the success in Africa. He models quite a bit of his reformed knowledge on his newfound respect for all individuals, white or otherwise. Having said that, the organization did refute membership to any white individuals. He stated that they could support the group, but it was part of the creation of the group that it must be only colored people who were actual members. Shortly after Malcolm's assassination, the group dwindled in size and momentum. Malcolm's half-sister, Ella, would take over, but the group had lost a charismatic leader, and it left a void too large for any one man or woman to fill. 4. He sued the penal system. After Malcom was released from prison, he would continue to visit inmates both in federal prison and in an institution similar to where he spent the remainder of his sentence, Norfolk Prison Colony, where they had a great big library. What many people don't know about Malcom is that he learned and came to know the religion of Islam through his brother, whom while Malcom was in prison would come to visit him, and recite and read him things from the Quran. It was this devotion from his brother, who kept reading to him when, at first Malcom would hear none of it, and it was this dedication that ultimately fueled his motivation to do the same with other inmates as his brother had done for him. Gaining permission to do this was another story, but he eventually succeeded. '5. The Pilgrimage to Mecca. In his spiritual and lifelong journey to his homeland, Malcom made his way through Saudi Arabia and throughout Africa. He would reflect in his autobiography about the life-changing experiences and epiphanies he would come to find while along this journey. It would be along this journey he would finally come to see the inherent good in human beings. He would make the suggestion that it is Western civilizations that promote the racist and unequal playing field in which we all live. He believed that the religion of Islam would eradicate the racism epidemic in America entirely. Malcom would also acknowledge that, while on his spiritual journey, he met some white men with whom, for the first time in his life, he felt he was finally seen as Malcom, and not another African American. It would be this coming to spirits that would fuel his re-emergence back in the States to help change his narrative about the white man. '6. Meeting with MLK. Martin Luther King, known for his belief in peaceful protest, and Malcolm X, known for quite the opposite. It's not hard to comprehend how so many seemed so threatened by Malcolm X, while feeling quite safe in MLK's revolution. These two men, accomplishing reform where they saw fit, seeking a better life for their children and their children's children. Martin Luther King, who was able to coordinate the March on Washington, where 20,000 people marched on the Lincoln Memorial in one of the greatest moments in history, seemed at the time, and still to be quite diplomatic in the plight of the African American. However, at the slightest mention of Malcolm X, you are much more likely to run into negative connotations and stigmas tied to his name. But for what reason? Because he was loud and animated. '7. when his home was burned to the ground. This certainly was a singular incident. Malcom was quite fixed that he had a limited amount of time before someone would try to take his life. Fortunately, this occurrence didn't hurt anyone in Malcom's family, although it would prove to set him aside in terms of his busy schedule. He set aside several appointments and talks he had scheduled. He gathered his things and did what Malcolm X does best, and kept on keeping on. However, just a week later, at the age of 40 years old, during a conference in which he had a large gathering, as he began to speak, several men wielding guns would open fire upon Malcolm, killing him on the spot. Even the most iconic members pioneering their way through history can't evade the speed of public ignorance. Without education, you're not going anywhere in this world. Malcolm studied for years in prison, reading anything he could get his hands on. What scared the masses the most about Malcolm X was that he in fact was educated in almost every challenge he approached aside from religion, and when an educated and unrestrained figure comes knocking on society's door with facts and experience to back up his arguments, he's certainly going to ruffle some feathers. Malcolm X prided himself on his brilliance, because he had been from the gutters of Harlem. He couldn't read. The only language he knew was that of the streets. He solicited women, robbed banks, knew here he stood, head held high with a brain jam-packed with ideals on how to reform the very society that crippled so many.